No! Sergeant Krieger! Darkseer shouted, as two of his brother Marines pulled him down into the undertunnels. The passage was ruined. Walls were blown out, and fires littered the floors, as wall remnants and bodies, both human and orc alike, burned. The area was dark. More than half the lights were broken. The lights that were remaining were dim or flickering from power surges, probably caused by the orcs. The sergeant ordered us to move on. We must honor him, Darkseer, one of the brother Marines said to the freshly deputized and field-promoted corporal. Looking down at the bolt pistol he gripped in his hand, he muttered, "You're right." Then, with newfound confidence, Darkseer said, "Bloodhounds, sound off. Orks, aye. Teredith, aye. Darvis, aye." The deputized corporal shouted, "Bloodhounds, move out!" The Marines ran through the dark, destroyed corridors of the underpassage, each step shaking the fragile and crumbling plasticrete floors they trod on. Darkseer slowed to a stop, raising his hand to signal. "What is it?" Teredith asked him from behind Orks. "Orks. 3 of them," Darkseer stated. The corporal tapped his lineman's ear to filter out the noises around him. The flames, the crackle, the warfare overhead. All now focused on the sound of the orcs. "They're 30 meters in the distance, round that corner of the wall." The deputized corporal pointed to a junction in the corridors a few meters away. The Marines approached the torn and burning corner of the wall. At the junction, "Darvis, with me," Darkseer said quietly, before quickly sneaking past the corridor's entrance, with Darvis repeating seconds after. Darkseer peered out into the short corridor. The orcs were in a circle around a fire of burning plasticrete, sitting, laughing, and drinking. "The orcs must not have noticed our approach," Darkseer said, leaning back behind the wall. "There is another corridor, an entrance within that section that we could use for cover." "Aye, aye," both Orks and Teredith replied. "Also, our exit is directly behind the orcs." Darkseer advanced through the short hallway, trying to stay out of sight when emerging from the other side. Darkseer waited for the other Marines to follow through the corridor before shouting, "Bloodhounds, choose your targets! Do not stop firing until they are dead!" The Marines aimed their bolt guns towards the orcs, locking on targets with the aid of their helmet guiding systems. "What was that?" followed by "Spice Marines!" echoed down the section toward the Bloodhounds. This was drowned out, though, by the deafening sound of the bolter fire rippling toward the orc boys. The orcs wailed and screamed in pain as the bolt rounds tore through the 2 closest orcs. The third turned around and sprinted up the existing ramp, catching a bolt round in his lower buttocks. A loud battle cry echoed through the underpassage, drowning out even the thunderous roars of the bolt guns. "Another wave of orcs!" Darvis shouted. "Aye," replied Teredith. Darkseer released the depleted magazine from the bolt gun that he had in his right hand, replacing it with a fresh magazine from his pouch. "Reload!" he shouted as the next wave approached. "That's them!" one of the orcs shouted. "Let's get him, boys!" another orc yelled. "Move aside!" shouted an orc knob in the wave, shoving its way past the smallest orc boys in his way. The knob tackled through the orcs like a battering ram, sending them toppling aside or trampled under its weight. "They're mine!" it screamed as it worked its way to the front. Darkseer and Darvis fired their bolt guns toward the orcs. The density from the two bolt guns' firepower concentrated on the ramp managed to down 6 of the oncoming orcs. Ignoring the fallen orcs ran towards the 4 Marines, each holding a unique monstrosity of twisted metal, so large the orcs needed both hands to wield them. The knob held what seemed to be a larger approximation of a chain axe, with the same teeth of the blade missing, and replaced with real teeth of bone. The orcs shouted a horrific "Wah!" which echoed and grew louder within the chambers underneath the war zone above. Darkseer noticed Herrix and Teredith weren't firing. Herrix was searching his pouches for a magazine, and Teredith was struggling with his bolter. "Marines! Do you not have ammunition?" Darkseer shouted. Herrix tore off his pouch from his waist after discovering a rip at its bottom. "It must have dropped! I'll go back!" "No!" Darkseer shouted. "Take this!" he said, tossing Herrix the bolt gun. Darkseer raised the bolt pistol in his left hand towards the knob, which was only 3 meters away. He aimed the pistol to the knob's giant head, the knob taking massive strides as it approached him. "We are the Emperor's will," Darkseer shouted before squeezing the trigger, releasing several bolts towards the knob. One of the bolt rounds hit into the knob's horned skull cap, bouncing off its side and rocketing off into the ceiling, creating a crater. One of the bolts passed through the orc's head from the eye. The third shot through its chest. The orc knob fell to one knee, cradling its new chest and head wounds. The deputized corporal took great pride in this moment and ran toward the defeated orc knob. "Darvis!" Herrick shouted to the lone marine. "Regroup!" Darvis continued to fire his bolt gun into the orcs past the knob, and Darkseer as he strafed to his right towards the other 2 marines. "Teredith, report! Is your firearm malfunctioning?" Darvis asked upon reaching him. "The damn thing's jammed," Darvis said, attempting to unlock the weapon. "It won't release." Darvis and Teredith continued to fire their weapons into the horde, approaching them, each bolt round downing at least one orc as they passed through the green, unending tide of orcs. "Yeah!" an orc yelled as it charged past the knob and Darkseer. Shouted another, as more and more orcs ran past towards the 3 marines. "Teredith, do you still have your combat blade?" Darvis shouted. "Aye," Teredith, looking up at his dysfunctional bolter. He unsheathed the 2-foot knife. "I've got a plan," Darvis said, as he shot down 2 of the orcs, closing in on them. but we're going to need you standing between Herrick's and myself. Teradith, we're going to need Darkseer back here. Darkseer looked down at the lingering knob, placing the bolt pistol against his forehead. This is for Sergeant Krieger, he shouted. Darkseer! Darvis shouted, catching his attention. The moment that he looked away was enough for the knob to take advantage. With a powerful backhand slam, the knob stood up and launched Darkseer through a pile of rusted metal. You're dead, Space Marine! The knob shouted as it tore through the pincushion of rusted metal bits. Tarrant, quickly, take my knife, Garrus said, quickly passing them the combat blade. The Marine rested the jammed bolter down, reaching for the combat blade. You keep them off of us. We keep them off of you, Darvis said, releasing the knife to Terry. Aye, he said, positioning himself in front of the other Marines with a knife in each hand. Come out here, Space Marine! The knob shouted as it tore through the pile. Darkseer had dropped the sergeant's pistol upon impact with the debris, reaching for it through the claustrophobic holes and gaps between the bars. I've got you now! The knob shouted as it grabbed the pinned Marine by the ankle and began to pull him toward it. Darkseer stretched and reached for the pistol he was sliding away from. Turning his attention to the knob, Darkseer kicked with his free leg into the Ork's groin. Darkseer grabbed the metal around it. It gave away and broke. There was nothing more than a scrap shard. Grasping at a pipe, lodged in the pile with his right hand, he stared up at the Ork knob staring down at him. The knob yanked on the Marine's leg, lifting him out of the scrap pile. Darkseer, using the momentum of the Ork's pull, slammed down a pipe from the debris, thrusting it through the knob's chest. Staggering off aimlessly for a moment, the knob headed back towards Darkseer, picking up one of the choppas of its fallen Ork brothers. It attempted to yell out another. The most it made was an odd gurgling noise, and a fountain of Ork blood shout out from the tip of the rusted pipe. Darkseer! Darvis shouted again to the deputized corporal. Darkseer tried walking as fast as he could with the dislocated leg toward the sergeant's bolt pistol laying just outside the scrap pile. The knob began to pull the pipe out from its chest, dripping with Ork blood. The knob tossed the pipe at Darkseer, knocking him forward onto the wall. Damn it! Darvis spat, noticing the Ork knob. You two hold position. I'll retrieve the corporal, Darvis stated. He fired twice with his bolter and sprinted to the aid of Darkseer. We must regroup, brother, Darvis said with his hand extended down for Darkseer. Darvis aimed his bolt gun at the severely wounded knob. We are his angels of death, he said, firing bolts into the knob's forehead and chest. The detonation left the knob's corpse scattered and torso-less. Darkseer reached over to the dropped pistol behind the scraps. Slowly standing himself up, he bore his weight onto the strong leg and began to limp back to Teradith and Herrick's, while firing the pistol to the remaining Orks. Darvis held Darkseer as a crutch, walking the corporal back, firing the bolt gun in his left hand. These Orks are unending, Orks stated. And ammo's running low. Teradith slammed the combat blade in his left hand down on top of an Ork's head, crunching its skull partially into its collar. With a horizontal swing of his right blade, his knife caught another Ork by the back of the neck. We need to move on soon. This is fruitless, Teradus shouted back to the Marines, while applying the boot of his power armor to an Ork's chest in a mighty kick. Herrix, Darkseer, Darvis began. If we focus our weapons on that promethium piping overhead, we might be able to... Darkseer raised his pistol to the piping over the Orks. Just shoot, Darvis, he said as he fired. Herrix and Darvis both fired as well at the piping. The Orks ran toward the 4 Marines, uncomplaining but curious as to why the Marines were no longer shooting at them. One of the Orks turned around, noticing the bolts were hitting the thick piping. The bolts at first dented the pipe, then managed to cause a breach in the pipe. And then only one more shot was needed to ignite the promethium. But the Marines kept firing for good measure, flames erupting from the pipe, filling the area underneath it with fire. The pipe burst, causing a massive explosion, collapsing the ceiling onto the Orks, opening up into an underpassage to the surface. The smoke and dust began to settle. The plasterite crumbled to the sides of the hole, giving an exit for the Marines. Flames spewed out from in between the cracks of the rubble. 3 buildings that the Orks had garrisoned were in sight from the hole. Shooter fire rained down into the underpassage. My leg's dislocated, Darkseer said to Darvis. Darvis placed the boot of his power armor on top of Darkseer's. He grabbed the corporal's armor by the shoulder and waist, and with a quick twist and some pressure applied to the boot, Darvis popped the leg back into position. Darkseer took a few steps. We must round the edges of this room to evade the enemy fire. Darkseer ran alongside the edge of the existing room and began to climb the loose rubble. With me, Bloodhounds! The Marines gripped onto the loose rock wall of the rubble, climbing it with as much effort and difficulty of climbing a ladder. Reaching the top and climbing over the edge, Darkseer noticed an Ork boy standing about 1 foot from him, bringing a downward swing with its chopper. Darkseer instinctively drew the pistol, dropping the Ork with a single bolt to the chest. Darkseer moved on toward the entrance of the building. The door was closed and locked. Herrix climbed out of the hole, accompanied by Terathor, then followed by Darvis. The buildings were mainly brick. A thin layer of plastrite was molded over top with a final wood finish to give it an authentic feeling of an aged building. The front entrance was surrounded by 2 columns of pillars made from the planet's marble, or some other similar stone. The warfare around them had taken its toll. Bullet shells, debris, had found their way into the pillars, but miraculously they still stood. The Orks had barricaded the buildings heavily, all of the windows boarded, desks and shelves, metal plates shoved in for protection. Darkseer briefly glanced to his squad. Bloodhounds, sound off, he said much quieter than before. Teradith, aye. Herrix, aye. Darvis, aye. Darkseer, aye, he said, before looking back to the door. Darkseer clenched his right hand into his fist, punched a hole through the door, the size of a man's head. The door was blocked by desks, chairs, a bookshelf. Darkseer's arm was caught in the wood, holding the door with his free hand. He kicked in the door with a massive boot, and the door crashed open. The piled-up furniture scattered and slid out of the way from the strength of his boot. The building interior was trashed. Walls filled with holes, pictures of the former inhabitants littering the floor, smashed and stepped on. A ceiling chandelier laid in pieces in the floor. The Marines entered the building cautiously. There was no sign of Orks present. The Orks must have been holding out in this hab building, Teredith said, looking down at one of the portraits on the floor. Very astute, Teredith, Darvis said in a mocking tone. Did that picture tell you that? Teredith picked up the portrait by the wooden frame. Corporal Gregor Henst, a man in his rough 30s. The picture showed donning an Imperial Navy uniform. An Imperial Aquila was stamped in gold on the bottom right of the portrait. Silence, Darvis, Darkseer ordered. There are Orks here, and they may have been alerted to our presence. Darkseer began to move his way up the conjoining staircase. Climbing the right set of stairs, the corporal glanced back for a moment, then said, Stay cautious. Remain vigilant. The Marines ascended the staircases. Darkseer took point leading the group from the front. Herrix and Teredith followed close behind, keeping their backs to the walls as they went. Darvis ascended the left staircase, keeping his bolter locked on the floors above him. The staircases conjoined into a single staircase bridged over the floor below. The second floor of the room had a wooden banister railing across its edge. There were 3 doors on the upper level, one opposite the staircase, and the other 2 opposite each other, on either side of the landing. Section secure, Darvis said, as he regrouped with the other Marines, ascending the final set of stairs. The Marines spread out open, reaching the landing. The Orks are through these doors, Darkseer said, pointing at the center door and nodding toward the other 2. Herrix, you take the left room. Darvis, the right. Teredith and I will take the center. Aye, both Herrix and Darvis said before running to each respective door. Darkseer kicked the door, knocking it off its hinge, shattering it. Darvis tackled his door, his shoulder pad smashing the door. Wood fragments fell from his shoulders as he entered. Herrix fired his bolt gun through the door blindly, then bashed the remaining tattered wood away with a backhand swing of his left arm. Darkseer ran into the room headstrong. Orks lined the windows, firing their shooters out, and all the Ork weapons had been rigged into the windows in one way or another. Darkseer ran to the closest Ork. The deafening noise of the shooters kept the Orks oblivious to the presence of the Bloodhound Space Marines. Darkseer slammed the Ork with a kick, with enough force that the wall gave, and the Ork crashed through, falling face first with the plascrete rubble from the second floor into the massive hole exposed into the underpassage. Taking notice of the Ork beside him, smashing through the wall, the 4 remaining Ork boys turned to see the 2 Marines breaching the room. The Ork closest to Darkseer charged him, with the shooter using it as a bludgeon. Darkseer quickly raised the bolt pistol, firing 2 shots into the Ork's chest, knocking it off balance. Running up to the Ork, Darkseer grabbed the back of its head and forced it into the floor. Teredith rushed towards the other 2 Orks, running past Darkseer as the corporal pinned the Ork under his foot, executing the alien with a single bolt round through the back of its skull. The Orks fired their shooters at Teredith as he charged towards them. The Ork's bullets bounced off of the Marine's armor when it struck. The Marine leapt towards the closest Ork, thrusting each knife down in both hands like talons on a bird of prey. The combat knives pierced the Ork through the chest, breaching its ribs. The Ork slammed its shooter across Teredith's helmet, denting and scratching it. Teredith pulled the right knife out of the orc, holding it in place with the other. And with a swift swing, the Space Marine sliced through the orc's neck, sending its head spinning through the air till it hit the floor, and rolled to a stop. Teredith kicked the decapitated orc off his knife and began to receive gunfire from the last orc boy. At such a close distance, the orc's accuracy was close to perfect. Nearly every shot that the orc fired landed on the breastplate of the Marine. Darkseer aimed the pistol at Orc, but Teredith screened his view. Red flashing lights, warning sirens flared within Teredith's helmet. Breastplate tolerance reaching critical levels, an automated woman's voice said to Teredith from within the helmet. A pictorial readout of the armor appeared in the top left of the helmet's tactical display. The chest section of the readout was orange-red. Several of the other sections were shown green and yellow. A few were orange. The orc grinned as each shot from the shooter held the Marine in position. A streak of blood from Teredith's mouth splashed against the tactical display. Armor breached, the automated voice stated. Injecting stimulants. The power armor automatically began feeding his body painkillers and adrenaline. The orc continued to shoot into the Marine, who remained standing in the face of danger. The wound in his stomach quickly closed into red scar tissue. The bleeding slowed to a stop due to the Laraman cells quickly working. The orc shooter clicked to a halt as its magazine ran dry. The orc frantically dropped to the floor, scrambling for one of the scattered firearms, as Teredith removed his helmet. The orc reached for a salvaged Daka gun resting on the floor. Teredith threw his helmet into the orc's side, knocking it over. The orc regained its footing and snarled at Teredith after it was back to its feet. Teredith lunged one of the knives like a javelin through the orc, taking the orc once again to the floor. Room clear, Teredith said, before taking a step backward, cradling his wound. Darkseer ran to Teredith's aid, ready to catch his wounded battle brother. "Stand back!" Teredith shouted, noticing Darkseer's extended arm. "I need no help," he said, as he regained his balance and posture. Teredith gripped his knife tightly in his right hand. He walked over to the dead orc, glaring down at it angrily, grabbing the handle of his other knife that had protruded from the orc's ribcage, pinned down into the floor. Teredith placing his boot over the orc's skull, crushing it as he retrieved the knife. Sheathing the knife into his right hand, the sheath locked to his right shin guard. Retrieving his helmet, he mag-clipped the helmet to his waist. "Room cleared," Eric said over the Vox. Darkseer and Teredith could both hear him through the inbuilt Vox devices planted in their ears. Darkseer pressed his gauntlet to his ear, activating the Vox. "Good work, Herrix. Continue on to Darvis's position." Darkseer faced the wall separating the room he was in from Darvis. "Teredith, have you any more grenades?" he asked, walking up to the wall. "No, Corporal. I used my last in the underground passage." Darkseer tore his pouch carrying grenades from his shin guard and placed it onto the floor against the center of the wall. "Then this will have to do." Darkseer quickly jogged to the center of the room. "Stand clear!" he shouted, as he aimed the bolt pistol towards the pouch. Teredith reacted immediately to the Corporal's order, quickly facing away, taking a few paces. The loud crack of the bolt pistol was short-lived and drowned out by the explosion from the grenades. The wall bursted and crumbled into the room in front of them. "Darvis, we're moving in your position," Darkseer said through the Vox. The marshal ran to the hole left behind the blast with Teredith, following close behind. "Where's Darvis?" Teredith shouted as Darkseer examined the room through the hole. "He should be," Teredith said, before being cut off by a massive orc war boss that had just walked around from beside the hole. The war boss's entire body was encased in thick orc mega armor. Hydraulic pistons moved the giant limbs of the robotic chassis that it wore. Its head was large, its skin darker than the smaller feebler orcs they had previously seen. Bionic implants littered the war boss's face. Its left eye replaced with a bionic lens. Its jaw was metal bent around its face, connected through bolts where it would have normally connected. Its left arm was a claw of blades, connected together through hinges and pistons, to squeeze and tear its prey apart. Its right arm was encased in large, multiple-barreled big shooter, with multiple armaments covering it. The warboss reached through the hole and pulled Darkseer through with its massive power claw. Ha 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 ha! More Space Marines to kill! The warboss shouted as it walked into the middle of the room and away from the hole. Darkseer was held high, above the warboss's head. The blades of the power claw dug itself into his power armor. Darvis's body laid lifeless on the other end of the room, his armor crushed in the waist. Large lacerations covered the armor, some finding their way to the flesh. The back of his head was smashed and torn out. Blood and delicate brain matter dripped and dangled from the exposed section of his skull. "Corporal!" Teredith shouted as he leaped through the hole onto the back of the warboss. The pistons strained with the added extra weight of the two Marines, and the warboss began to lose balance. Teredith grabbed at the pipes and exposed cabling with his free hand, hooking onto the warboss with his knife in the other. "Get off of me, you git!" the warboss shouted as it tried to shake off the Marine from its back. Darkseer could feel the pressure from the claw rise and lower and dig into the ceramite layers of his power armor. Aiming the pistol through the vice grip of the talon-like fingers, Darkseer fired 3 times into the mechanical, robotic arm, bending one of the pistons and fracturing the armor behind it. "Roar!" the warboss shouted as its attention was brought back to the Marine's grip. Darkseer fired twice more into the arm, piercing it with the second shot. The bolt round exploded within the arm, and its grip loosened. Teredith grabbed one of the pipes connecting from the warboss's back into the shoulder plates of the mega armor. Teredith chopped into the piping. Black, greasy oil spurted out onto his face, dripping down into the breastplate of his armor. The massive claw flew lifelessly into the warboss's side. Dropping Darkseer on his back, Teredith struggled to stay on the warboss as it shook and butted. The warboss crashed its back into the wall behind it, smashing, leaving an indent into the wall of the Marine's backpack. "Corporal, quickly!" Teredith shouted. "I can't hold it much longer!" Teredith held on with every ounce of strength he had. Darkseer aimed the bolt pistol towards the warboss, taking a few quick shots as he raised it. The mega armor easily took the rounds that were over-eagerly fired. With one great swing, the warboss's weight, it swung the dead claw arm into the side of the corporal, sending him rolling across the floor. The warboss reached and swung at its own back with its robotic gun arm, taking blind shots as it swung. Striking Teredith with the broadside of the big shooter across the head, the warboss managed to dislodge the Marine, then turned to face and crush whoever dared annoy it. Teredith rolled to his hands and knees, and stood back ready to fight. Teradith lunged forward to attack the war boss again, but was stopped by the four-barreled big shooter aimed towards his face. You ain't so tough, the war boss said, as it stared through the sights of its big shooter. Not as tough as us Orks, it continued grinning as it mocked Teradith. We Orks fight, 'cause we're the biggest. We Orks fight, 'cause we're the toughest. We Orks fight, 'cause we're the strongest. Darkseer rolled over onto his back to see the war boss holding Teradith at gunpoint. Orks fight, 'cause we're gonna win. The war boss readied its aim at Teradith's face. Now tell me this, Omi. What do you fight for? We fight for the Emperor, Herrick shouted from the hole in the wall. Herrick fired a single shot at the war boss, causing it to step back from Teradith in surprise. Through error we serve, he continued shouting, as he fired again at the war boss, walking towards it as he spoke. We are steel, and we are doom, he said, taking another shot at the war boss, catching it to middle jaw, dropping the war boss to one knee. We are his angels of death, Herrick shouted, as he drew his combat knife from its sheath at his waist. His space marines, he said, raising the knife in his left hand, readying it above the war boss's head. And we shall know no fear, he shouted, as he brought the knife down towards the war boss. With a loud roar, the war boss tackled forward into Herrick's, flailing its dead claw arm as it charged. Herrick's was sent hurtling through the air several feet from the floor until he crashed into the corner of the room. Teradith leaped once more onto the back of the war boss, hooking his combat knife into the side of the war boss's neck. The war boss shouted as it began to flail and stomp in a tantrum of destructive force. Teradith drew the other combat knife from the sheath on his shin guard, then quickly slammed the second knife into the other side of the orc's neck. The war boss twitched as the two knives dug and explored the inside of its neck. The orc's mouth filled with frothy blood, which dripped from its lips. For a brief moment, the war boss seemed to be staring off into nothing, before Teradith pulled both knives entirely through the thick green stalk of a neck that the war boss had, dropping its head to the floor. The mega armor stood upright, as it was too heavy and rigid to fall over from the dead orc's weight. Darkseer stood upright and joined his brother Marines. Darvis? Herrick asked Darkseer. Dead, Darkseer replied, pointing over to Darvis's body. Herrick looked over to their fallen brother, then looked down to the floor. Then we are 3, where we started on this mission as 10. Darkseer walked to Darvis's body and knelt over his fallen brother. We are 3, where 3,000 would fall. We must remain vigilant. Darkseer began searching Darvis's pouches for ammunition or grenades, but they were both absent from the Marine's pouch. Darkseer picked up Darvis's bolt gun and released its magazine to check its ammo, and when satisfied, he slammed the magazine back in. Looting is beneath us, Corporal, Herrick said, disapproving, with Darkseer searching Darvis. So are millions of orcs, and between you and me, I'd feel more comfortable bringing this with me, Darkseer said, gesturing at the bolt gun. Darkseer looked up to Teradith. Put your knives away, the corporal ordered. Teradith resheathed the combat blade in his right hand into the sheath on his shin guard, Catch, Darkseer said quickly, with disregard to if Teradith was ready or not, and tossed the bolter to Teradith, who fumbled to awkwardly catch it. Now this first objective has been completed. We will move on to obtaining the relic, Darkseer said as he strode quickly towards the door, leading back out to the main room of the building. Teradith and Herrick followed close behind, taking their last looks at their fallen brother as they left him behind.